Good afternoon, everyone. This is Gatwiri Muthara, Membership and Communications Manager with COMTO National. We're going to be starting in just a minute. I wanted to give a few seconds for some of our audience to come in. So once again, this is Gatwiri Muthara, Membership and Communications Manager at COMTO National, where we are celebrating 50 years of moving the nation. And I'd like to welcome you to our event to meet the FRA Deputy Administrator Amit Bose. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our industry partners for their support throughout the year. They are ACOM, H&TB, Jacobs, and WSP. I'd like to give a few webinar housekeeping items. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please send a chat message to the host. To submit questions for the Q&A portion of the call, please use the Q&A box. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. This call is being recorded and will be made available to all attendees. And once again, thank you for joining us. Now I'd like to introduce Tara Mcdaniel, Interim President and CEO of COMTO National.
Thank you, Gatwiri, and good afternoon, COMTO leadership. I want to welcome you and thank you for taking time out of your busy day for this very important, critical, and timely discussion that we are about to have. As a reminder, on this call, we do truly have the COMTO leaders, and that we have invited the COMTO Board of Directors, the presidents of all of our chapters, all of the committee chairs and co-chairs, as well as the entire Legislative Advisory Council and the Hub subcommittee. So again, we thank you for joining us. We have a very important discussion to move forward with, and I am going to introduce Renee Banks. Most of you know Renee. She is a longtime member of COMTO, President and CEO of DW Peoples, the only African-American railroad construction company. And she is the co-chair of COMTO's Legislative Advisory Council, and she does a magnificent job and is a wonderful partner. As many of you know, we are watching the infrastructure language very closely as it makes its way through the House and through the various Senate committees. And she is a wonderful partner and leader of the Legislative Advisory Council, keeping us abreast of all of the changes and everything that we have to look forward to. So with that, I will introduce Renee Banks.
Thank you so much, Tara. And Tara's definitely my partner in crime, and I really appreciate you. And I appreciate everyone on this call. And thank you so much, Deputy Administrator, for taking the time out and to meet with us, and as well as we extend that gratitude as well to your staff who've been working with us over the last couple of months. I wanted to very quickly thank you and the administration for your efforts thus far with the American Jobs Act, and also with the executive order that the president signed in January, committing to equality, racial equality and racial equity, and trying to narrow that gap of disparity in terms of contracting and participation, outright participation in the process. Very quickly, being respectful of your time, I'd like to just very quickly run over our legislative agenda for 2021-22. And our focus, of course, first and foremost is always safety. And many of our membership and our constituencies are frontline people who are working on the front line of transportation, and also are the ridership on all modes of transportation, particularly rail and light rail and heavy rail passenger service. We'd like to see overall improvements to the US DOT Disadvantaged Business Program, improvements and enhancements and efficiencies. And as part of that, we'd like to see, as you well know, a DBE program within the Federal Railroad Administration. And I know that we'll hear some more about that. We would like to see accommodations made for size standards, and also personal net worth that will allow wealth growth for and wealth development in minority business communities and in minority neighborhoods. We'd like to see equity in underserved communities. We would like to see some kind of accommodation made for graduates of or mid-tier businesses. Once they graduate from the DBE program or become too large for the DBE program, there's a very large percentage of business failures once they graduate out of the DBE program. And that's something that we'd like to see is made part of the FRA DBE program from the ground. Local hiring initiatives is another one of our great interests, and some kind of incentivization or incentive for local hiring and tapping into that pool of chronically unemployed and training them to have long-term careers in the transportation industry. So that's just an overview, very quick summary of our legislative program. And with that, I would like to introduce my very good friend and COMTO colleague, Gwendolyn Gray. And Miss Gray is a very good friend.
She's on mute.
Renee, you accidentally muted yourself.
I accidentally muted myself. I'm so sorry, Gwendolyn. Ms. Gray is a COMTO National Board member, and importantly, is co-chair of the HUB subcommittee, that's historically underutilized businesses, and our two committees work very closely together. She is also vice president and program management director at HNTB. And Gwen, please take it away. I appreciate your help and everything that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. I appreciate that great introduction, and I'd like to thank the FRA administration and everyone on this call for joining us today for this great meeting that we're going to have in store for us. COMTO and COMTO subcommittee strongly endorse an FRA program to allow DBs an opportunity to participate in contracts for heavy rail projects and related industries awarded by the state and local agencies that receive federal FRA funds. An FRA DB program will provide opportunities for new DB startups that mean millions of dollars for minority businesses and would provide thousands of jobs for the minority communities. COMTO will recommend a regulation to increase the DB participation goal to 40%. And that include other small businesses as MBE, DVBE, WBE. The small business sector in the economy engineer drives the nation's economy. It is important that DBs can compete and participate in federal fund railroad projects. Those roles vary from track construction to engineering, design to procurement of supplies needed to strengthen our rail nationally. That means millions of dollars for minority business and thousands of jobs in the minority community. And now I would like to share a little bit about our today's guest speaker, Federal Railroad Deputy Administrator Amit Bose. Amit Bose served as the Deputy Administrator for the Federal Railroad FRA. Previously, Amit worked at HNTB as architectural and engineering firm, where he also served as board chair for a coalition of the Northeast Corridor and on the New Jersey Restart and Recovery Advisory Council. He has previously served at the FRA during the Obama-Biden administration as Deputy Administrator, Chief Counsel, Senior Advisor, and Director of Governmental Affairs and the U.S. Department of Transportation, DOT, as Associate General Counsel and Deputy Assistant Secretary for Governmental Affairs. In these positions, he worked on safety, policy, regulatory, and government affair matters and provided legal counsel, guidance, and advice to the Office of the Secretary of the DOT's Operating Administration. Before DOT, Amit also worked for New Jersey Transit, the New Jersey Department of Transportation, and as the transportation staffer in the U.S. Congress. His involvement in many rail and transportations prior to joining the executive branch includes securing the full funding grant agreement for the Hudson Virgin Light Rail, Norwalk Light Rail, and the Congressional Authority for the 50-foot deepening of New York Harbor. In addition, he was in private practice in Georgia, focused on land use, environmental, and municipal law. Amit has an AB from Columbus College, a MIA from Columbus University School of International and Public Affairs, and a JD from the University of Georgia. Please welcome FRA Deputy Administrator Amit Bose. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that introduction. And it's great for me to join with you today. And I know some of you will remember I was supposed to have done this a couple of weeks ago. And I want to thank you so much for accommodating the change because I had to attend President Biden's event where he celebrated Amtrak's 50th anniversary, like COMTO in some ways, in Philadelphia. And so I missed that noontime appearance 2 weeks ago on April 30th. So thank you so much for accommodating my schedule. I really have been looking forward to this opportunity to speak to you today. I'm going to cover a lot of ground because, like I said, I've been waiting for this opportunity for quite a while. FRA reached out to COMTO because it's important. And it made clear to me that I needed to introduce myself in my new role, establish a dialogue, and share with you some key priorities of the Biden-Harris administration. Throughout this journey, we've made a tremendous difference advocating for minorities in every single sector of the multimodal transportation industry, including rail. I understand COMTO represents more than 3,000 members in the United States and Canada right now, offering them everything from leadership training to professional development to advance their careers. Yet, as you well know, the organization's most challenging work has been on the front lines, championing employment diversity, inclusion, and contracting opportunities in the multi-billion-dollar transportation industry. Your efforts have not been lost on me and others like you. The Biden-Harris administration believes that diversity moves the nation. COMTO has taken this position from day one, enlightening those of us in transportation agencies, politics, and corporations on these very critical issues of fairness, access, and opportunity in the workplace and in communities. Thank you for assuming such an important role. We realize that a lot more remains to be done. FRA and the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Biden-Harris administration are all on board working together to bring about much needed change. I'll share more details shortly. But first, because a great deal has transpired over the past few months and recent weeks, I want to provide you a brief overview of some significant events that impact us all. As transportation professionals, I know you have been keeping up with the news. You know that something no less than spectacular is on the cusp of transforming our industry, this nation, and our lives. It started with the historic $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan passed by Congress and President Biden signed into law. That coronavirus relief bill provides economic aid to millions of Americans devastated by the effects of COVID-19. The measure, as you probably know, also bolsters transportation. public transit and commuter rail agencies received over $30 billion in emergency relief. FRA also dispersed $1.7 billion to Amtrak to restart daily long distance train service and return thousands of its furloughed employees to their work posts. Our next step is to ensure infrastructure investments are made to keep the economic engines churning, to push for transformative projects, to build back better than we were before. This is what President Biden's American Jobs Plan aims to do. It would invest about $2 trillion to transform our infrastructure, not just highways, bridges, ports, and airports and transit systems, but also drinking water, electric grid, high-speed broadband, and so much more to help our communities. The plan would catapult our nation into the future in a way the president says we have not seen since we built the interstate highway system 65 years ago and won the space race in 1969. And it would build back better in ways that position American communities. And when we say communities, we mean all communities for future success. Late last month, Secretary Pete Buttigieg told Congress that this would be a missed opportunity if we simply build back exactly to where we were before. In other words, we need to seize the moment to be big, bold, and brilliant. This means investing in rail projects, for example, that will not only repair and replace aging infrastructure, but also maintain what we have and expand capacity. Projects that create good paying jobs and promote economic growth at the same time, and projects that will combat the climate crisis and advance equity, of which you're on the front lines. After decades of disinvestment, the US faces a $1 trillion backlog of needed repairs. Sadly, compared with the rest of the world, we've fallen to 13th place in the overall quality of our infrastructure. It's against this backdrop that the American Jobs Plan seeks to make a $620 billion investment in transforming our nation's crumbling transportation infrastructure. Because COMTO represents a broad range of transportation interests, let me highlight a few key investment areas. The president wants to modernize 20,000 miles of highways, roads, and main streets by fixing them right the first time with safety, resilience, and all users in mind. He wants to double federal funding for public transit, including rail cars, stations, and thousands of miles of tracks, signals, and power systems that need replacing. And he wants to improve ports, waterways, and airports. As you can see, the American Jobs Plan is ambitious. Congress will need to sign off on it, and we are working closely with them, stakeholders, and the public to get input and ideas to make this happen. We can't thank you enough for your support of this endeavor. We're determined more than ever to make sure our policies recognize our shared history, whether it's highways ripping apart established neighborhoods or transit deserts, what the secretary calls the history of harm as we move forward. And that includes contracting. As he notes, we have a chance to get it right now, to make investments that expand opportunity instead of cutting people off from opportunity, to build and enrich neighborhoods and businesses instead of breaking them up, and to examine the equity implications of everything we do in the federal government. This is central to our vision of transportation policy, and it applies to highways, transits, airports, rail, you name it. No mode of transportation will escape scrutiny. To this point, President Biden issued Executive Order 13985, advancing racial equity support for underserved communities through the federal government in January. Despite the long title, the message is clear, something you would appreciate. And it's this: entrenched disparities in our laws and public policies and in our public and private institutions have often denied equal opportunity to individuals and communities. The administration's policy is that FRA and other federal government agencies pursue a comprehensive approach to advance equity for everyone, including people of color and others who have been historically underserved, marginalized, and adversely affected by persistent poverty and inequality. This is a sea change. In addition, the EO states that government programs are designed to serve all eligible individuals, and government contract and procurement opportunities should be available on an equal basis to all eligible providers of goods and services. I believe this coincides with COMTO's longstanding efforts to eliminate barriers to maximum participation for minorities, veterans, people with disabilities, and certified minority, women, and disadvantaged business enterprises. In keeping with the Biden-Harris administration's focus on promoting diversity and inclusion, we're currently conducting a nationwide small minority and women-owned disparity study. I know some of you have heard a lot about that. Our goal is simple: to determine whether the playing field is level for firms seeking to win subcontracts from our grantees receiving the federal funds that we administer. The survey will help us understand if disparities exist, and if so, the nature of the disparities. Last month, I sent letters to stakeholders and survey recipients stressing this point because a lot is at stake here, financially and for the diversity and inclusivity of the nation's workplaces. It's also an important basis on which we will put together a DBE program if Congress puts it into law. To put it into context, last year, to promote a safe, efficient, reliable rail network, we awarded more than $1 billion in grants for freight and passenger projects that Congress authorized. The president's new fiscal 2022 budget request includes over $600 million that would be used to help spark what President Biden calls the second great rail revolution. In the end, the survey results will inform FRA, the Secretary, and Congress whether FRA will need a DBE program. We're asking all businesses and stakeholders, including any COMTO members who are randomly selected, to take this electronic survey to respond as soon as possible, even if you've never performed any work for FRA as a prime or subcontractor. The survey is designed to measure your experiences and perceptions to give you a voice. Again, we're seeking a clear picture of our contracting practices and need the voluntary participation of all types of firms that could potentially serve FRA's needs. Jack Fawcett Associates and the University of Chicago's National Opinion Research Center are conducting the survey on our behalf and have distributed over 50,000 copies. Again, if you've been contacted, I strongly urge you to participate and provide any requested information as soon as possible. To be statistically valid and random, there must be an overall significant response rate. To provide some additional background, prior to 2011, FRA's grant agreements used the same Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that prohibited discrimination based on race and gender as most of the department's agencies. FRA's grant clause was later modified in 2011, requiring recipients to submit small business utilization plans. The race and gender neutral portions of the DBE program were used as best practices. Last year, our grant clause was updated again, this time to match that of other DOT agencies and to reflect updates to Title II of the Federal Regulations Part 200, which includes specific requirements for small business utilization in federal contracts. FRA's grant agreements, however, prohibit discrimination based on race and gender as stated in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Also, last year, OMB made a revision requiring recipients of federal funds to take all necessary steps to ensure that minority businesses, women business enterprises, and labor surplus firms are used whenever possible. The rule is broader in its requirements than Title VI alone. We expect the Department's Office of Civil Rights to implement a process for enforcement soon. Although FRA intends to press forward with a Part 200 Section 321 compliance program as soon as possible. Enforcing and expanding our existing contractual ability is a key part of the Biden-Harris administration agenda to restore equity to our grant program. In addition to FRA's grant programs, the department has a very robust and successful small business contracting assistance program that helps small companies win federal contracts. SBA sets the contracting goals for the following categories: small disadvantaged businesses, women-owned businesses, service disabled veteran-owned small businesses, and small businesses in historically underutilized business zones. As we saw earlier, hub zones. As you can see from the highlights in the table that I'm about to show, for fiscal year 2020, the SBA goal for total small business eligible dollars was 32.25%. We achieved 49.96%, exceeding the goal. During the same period, our achievement rate for small disadvantaged business participation program and women-owned small business program were 26.12% and 20.67% respectively. That's higher than the goal set by the SBA. As you can see, we're off to a robust start for FY 2021 as well. The percentages shown cover the period from October 1 through this past April 16th. And overall, we've more than exceeded SBA's goal. And this is a really important point. That said, we still hear from people who tell us they're unaware of the business opportunities FRA offers. Just last month, FRA was a guest speaker at the department's Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization event, Working Women Wednesday. Last month, next month, we're going to participate in a discussion about contracting at FRA during a departmental contracting session that's part of the White House initiative for HBCUs. As you can see, this slide that I'm showing right now is for those of you and your members who are interested in doing business with us. It gives you a few bits of information that you need to know. The department publishes an annual forecast of upcoming opportunities that include FRA procurements. It's called Fiscal Year All Procurement Opportunity Forecast, and it's on the department's website at transportation.gov. beta.sam.gov is now official. It's a go-to government website serving as the point of entry for people who learn and search contract opportunities. It officially replaced fbo.gov. Don't limit your horizons. A lot of times when we offer an opportunity to large businesses, we ask that they partner with a small business or mentor one. Don't shy away from any available opportunities that might be fruitful. And finally, I encourage you to speak with the small business specialists at the department's agencies. For more information about business opportunities at FRA, contact Terry Weems, our small business specialist, at terry.weems, W-E-E-M-S, @dot.gov. Besides the grants and SBA contracting assistance programs I mentioned earlier, FRA also offers research and development funding opportunities through our Office of Research, Development, and Technology. This office works to improve railroad safety, promote innovation, and support national rail transportation policy. I don't know how many of you are familiar with our broad agency announcements, better known as BAA, and I'm sure some of your members would be interested in learning more about them. Every year, FRA releases 1 or 2 BAAs to solicit proposals on a variety of research topics that will have a direct impact on safety of the national rail system. These opportunities are not limited to the transportation industry. State and local government organizations and academia are also eligible to conduct applied technology research. In case you missed it, we released the fiscal year 2021 BAA to solicit concept papers for research projects in track, equipment, train control, human factors, workforce development, and infrastructure resiliency on April 12th. For more information about the fiscal year 21 BAA, visit beta.sam.gov. The deadline to submit all concept papers is June 4th, 6 weeks away. Next, I want to show you a graphic that shows funding for our fiscal year 2020 research projects, which includes BAAs and non-BAAs with American universities that totaled over $4.8 million. It includes Tuskegee University in Alabama, among others. Now that we've assembled some points of contact lists, we're making a concerted effort to increase awareness of our funding opportunities with minority serving institutions going forward, and you can definitely help us spread the word. With that, I want to thank you very much for your time and attention. We're taking inequity seriously, and we're working to ensure that everyone who wants an opportunity to compete fairly for government contracts that help grow our economy and transform our communities gets them. The administration firmly believes in transportation as a civil right for the American people. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I'd be more than happy to answer some of the questions I know you've been eagerly waiting to ask.
Thank you so very much, Deputy Administrator Bose. We appreciate the outreach to COMTO. We appreciate the opportunity to have had several conversations with your staff. And so thank you again for joining us today. To tie this down, as Renee and Gwen mentioned, the establishment of a DBE program at the FRA has been on COMTO's legislative agenda for several years. And so we are very pleased to see that there is now some movement with respect to establishing that. And just as a reminder, one of the steps toward establishing that is the disparity study. And for those of you who are members of the HUB Subcommittee and Legislative Advisory Council, we've had a lot of conversation around the disparity study. A lot of questions came in around the disparity study. And so we are so pleased to have, first of all, I want to bring on Calvin Gibson, who is the director of the Office of Civil Rights at the FRA. And we have had several wonderful, productive conversations with Calvin. So thank you so much for dedicating so much time to listening to COMTO's request around the establishment of a DBE program. And Calvin, thank you also to the team for bringing on the researchers who are actually working on the disparity study. So we have them as a resource to be able to answer any questions that we have. Just as a note, we got a lot of questions in anticipation of the last session. So we're going to actually start with those questions we received previously. And then if we have time, we will get to questions that are in the Q&A. So with that, Calvin, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Terry.
And in addition to that, we have Michael Lawrence. And Michael, if you could unmute yourself and just share a little bit about, thank you, who you are and your background, that would be great.
Sure. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Mike Lawrence from Jack Fawcett Associates. I'm the president of the firm, and I'm the project manager for the disparity study for the FRA. I'm an economist by training. I've been doing this for about 40 years. My firm does economic analysis for public agencies all over the country in all modes of transportation. And it's a pleasure to do this particular study. This study, as you know, with disparity studies, they are governed by case law, deciding what activities are undertaken in the study, what data is collected, how that data is presented, and how a DVE program then evolves from that process. So we're in the middle of it and enjoying the process, and great to answer any questions that you have for us.
Perfect. And I also would like to very quickly introduce Michael Lestingi. Michael, don't kill me for mispronouncing your last name. Did I get it correct?
You got it. Perfect.
Awesome. And can you introduce yourself as well?
Of course. Hello, everyone. I'm FRA's acting executive director. So happy to be with COMTO today, joining the deputy administrator and this great team working on the disparity study and so many issues important to COMTO and transportation.
Thank you. So again, I want to thank everyone for at the FRA for your partnership, the information you provided, making yourselves available to COMTO and doing this session today. So I'm going to lead off with the first question that we received. Again, the members of the committees on this call know that there's been a lot of conversation around the disparity study. So the first question is, can we get an explanation of methodology and the sampling model for the DBE survey? And so there were, as you may recall, when we've discussed this previously, we were trying to understand how the sample and the target audience was selected, because we want to make sure that there is representation within the COMTO constituency, and we've not yet found that. And kind of how you guys targeted that, identified that, and you know, how that was established. So I'll turn it over to those who know way more than I.
Thanks so much for that question. And I know that it's a big one, and we definitely don't want this to be opaque for COMTO and its members. I'll make a general statement, and then I'm going to turn it over to Michael here to give additional information. And I don't mean to get into legalese and talk about, you know, courts and case law, but we do live under the terms where the courts, we expect, will take a look at this when FRA gets a DBE program after Congress passes a law on it. And the DBE study methodology is determined by the laws from the district courts as well as Supreme Court case law. But I'm going to turn it over to Michael so that he gets an opportunity to respond more directly.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary. And that's a good question. And as you indicated, it's the right Michael, right? We got two Michaels on there. So as you said, the activities in the disparity study are governed by the case law. So we follow those principles and practices when we move forward with the project. Right now, we're in the middle of a major data collection effort, and there are kind of two sides to that data collection effort. One side is tracing the FRA grants from 2010 to 2017. It's about 550 grants for about $28 billion. And we're following all of those expenditures from the grantees to their prime contractors and to the prime contractors subcontractors to identify who is actually spending the dollars that are being provided under the grants by FRA, and identifying the ownership of those firms. So we can identify the utilization of minority and women-owned businesses by FRA in the grant program. So that's sort of half of the picture. That tells us what markets the FRA grantees and their prime and subcontractors work in, so that we can target those industries, those particular NAICS codes, those government associated sectors so that we identify the areas in which the contract funds are going. And we also do this geographically. So we're looking at where the funds are spent across the country. So we get a good picture of where the funds are going. And then we ask ourselves, the rules require us to ask the question of what's the availability of minority and woman-owned businesses in these sectors, in these regions of the country, where the monies are being spent. So we do, and we have underway now a major survey being done by the University of Chicago's National Opinion Research Center. That's in the field now, as they like to tell me. There's about 50,000 firms selected in the sample right now. Those firms are from about 30 sectors that account for, I think it's about 90% of all the dollars that are awarded under the FRA grants. And there are about 13 million firms in those sectors. So there are a lot of firms out there, and we're selecting 50,000 of them at random. We stratify this random sample by those sectors, by their participation in the FRA program, and by the geography of those individual sectors. So we send surveys to ask these firms about what their ownership is, whether they have ever considered working for the FRA, or they work for them now, or they have considered working for the FRA in the past. We ask them what kind of barriers they see to working for FRA. Do they have financial barriers? Do they have information barriers? Have they have difficulty getting the right labor force available to participate in FRA grants? And a number of other questions to get a picture of their decision-making about, do we work for FRA or not? And we also identify what the ownership is. So we have a picture of whether they're minority, woman-owned, or not. And that information gives us an idea on the availability of minority and woman-owned businesses to support the FRA programs in the regions of the country and in the sectors that we've identified. So that's sort of the process to get to disparity. Disparity is a measurement of utilization of minority and women-owned firms to the total amount available in these particular sectors. So that's the database we have to get together. And we're in the process of doing that right now. The Deputy Administrator has sent out a couple of letters for us that these have been provided to these 50,000 firms that encourage them to participate. They go to a website to fill out the survey. It's a very easy process. It takes 5 minutes to do it. But they have to, make that first step and go to the website and do it. And the Deputy Administrator has encouraged them, and many have, thousands have at this point, and many more will before we finish this process. That's kind of a look at what we're doing here.
So thank you for sharing that. Couple of follow-ups. I'm sure you can understand COMTO's position that we want to ensure that there is adequate representation with respect to availability of minority-owned businesses within that sample. And so perhaps, my understanding in our previous conversations is that the sample is the sample, right? And so that has been established and the survey has gone out. And I realize that there is a low response rate. But COMTO's position is that we just want to make sure that within that sample, minority-owned businesses are well represented. So it ends up kind of being like a catch-22. If you're not in the sample, then you're not be able to share your voice or give your opinion. So that is COMTO's position. The other question that continually comes up, and I'll look to Michael and Calvin because we've had this conversation several times before, is around the disparity study. So, with the exception, I think it's Maritime and FRA, the only two modes that don't have dedicated DBE programs. And so often, no, Calvin, did I misspeak?
Oh, actually, yes, ma'am. Actually, only 3 of the modes have dedicated DBE programs: the Federal Aviation Administration, Federal Highway Administration, and Federal Transit. and all the rest of the modes do not.
Do not,
So,
okay.
yeah,
Well,
so
there- well,
lots of
I don't-
opportunities
Yeah,
there.
there is a lot of opportunity, but the thought process is that if you already have established DBE programs within the DOT, why then do you need to conduct an individual separate process for the DBE, for a disparity study in order to move forward at the FRA? And we've had this conversation before, but Calvin, maybe if you can share the thinking behind and the reasons why there is a necessity to conduct a disparity study.
Oh, absolutely. In order for a disparity study to withstand litigation that we all anticipate that it will have to withstand, it has to meet a strict scrutiny standard that's set by the Supreme Court. And the federal highway and federal transit programs especially have been challenged. And it has been critically important that Congress have a firm record establishing discrimination within that contracting industry as the basis for imposing the program. So the study will be one component of that. And traditionally in the past, Congress has held hearings and collected anecdotal evidence from other sources, and they've looked to our complaint history and all different sorts of things to put into the record, and then they make a finding from Congress and establish the program on that basis. So it's important, and trust me, we've had this debate back and forth because internally, because if you read the language behind the existing programs, they talk in terms of surface transportation. And if you think of surface transportation in the general sense, it sounds like railroad should be included. But our attorneys tell us that that's a relatively unique contracting family. So the need for the study.
Thank you.
Tara, could I just have one more?
Absolutely.
And I think this is implicit of what folks are saying today, but I just really want to underscore it. I think one of the biggest reasons for kind of this process, even though I think we're all anxious to want to get to the end, is that we have a program that withstands that scrutiny, so that we have a program that lasts, so that we have a program that isn't just in one administration or another, that we have one that is a lasting program that can address the disparity, address the inequity, and really get us to the end across as long as that takes. And so it's that dedication to wanting something that is here for us as long as we need it, that I think is the focus on the process, which I know is super frustrating. And I know for sure it's frustrating to the deputy administrator, because he's encouraged us to focus all of our attention to get that program that lasts for everyone.
Well, we certainly want to ensure that it can withstand the legal scrutiny, but we did get a lot of questions around timing. So we understand the response rate is low. And so is there going to be additional outreach, and is there an opportunity to expand the pool, the sample pool? And then a lot of our members are very anxious, as you said, to be able to take advantage of these opportunities that will come with the establishment of a DBE program. And so what is kind of the cutoff date for the disparity study? What is the, will the deadline be extended? Give us a kind of a timeline of what are the next steps.
Sure. So I'll take that, and then Michael Lawrence or Calvin Gibson, you can jump in after I talk. So unfortunately, the data collection efforts will not be completed by May 31st. As such, what we've done is reached out and received Office of Management and Budget permission, because we have to go through them in order to do the surveys and we got their permission in the first place to expand the survey to include an additional 20,000 firms. So we're not meeting May 31st, but we are going to include an additional 20,000 firms. The reason behind the inclusion of the additional firms is to ensure that we account for the low response rate that we've gotten so far. As the number of completed surveys determines the level of confidence with which we can express the disparity ratio for each sector and region, we want to make sure we're getting enough responses back. The identified firms that surveys were sent out to are in the economic sectors of the railroad contracting industry that supports FRA grantees, and were selected from the Dun and Bradstreet D&B Hoover's U.S. firm database. The D&B Hoover's U.S. firm database covers about 400,000 firms nationwide, and from that, we selected 50,000 so far. We're going to select 20,000 more. The survey is stratified by 30 economic sectors and 9 census divisions for a total of 270 subsamples. However, in some of these 270 subsamples, we are close to exhausting the population that meets our criteria. And Michael Lawrence, feel free to jump in.
I sure will. Let me clarify the numbers a little bit. The Dun and Bradstreet database, the Hoover's firm database, was the largest database of information on U.S. firms, in fact, firms in the world, that's available anywhere. That has about 35 million firms included in the database in the United States. And when I say included in the database, it has information about the firm, what their revenues are, what their location is. It has contact information, emails, other information about the firm's business, some much more detailed and designed really for people who are trying to market them. But in our case, we just need to be able to contact them. Within those 30 sectors of the economy that FRA sends funds to, and these, we think about them as we're talking about railroad activities here. So some of these sectors are railroad sectors. They, the word railroad is there, and we know what they do. Others are all kinds of construction support activities, who do work in all construction areas. They might work on residential construction, but sometimes firms in those sectors do work for prime contractors that are working for the FRA. So these are all potential firms that could be supporting the FRA. So the disparity study rules requires us to look at the full measure of firms in a particular sector. So in the 30 sectors, there are about 13 million firms in those 30 sectors that are potential contractors who do the kind of work that FRA buys. They may be minority firms, they may be woman-owned firms or not, but there are 13 million of them out there. And we have drawn a sample so far of 50,000 of those. And as the Deputy Administrator said, we've added 20,000 recently to get to the 50,000 level. We may be adding more still as we try to increase the number of responses. It's a random sample, so we would expect to identify as a percentage in that sample that's about equal to the percentage of minority firms and women-owned firms that exist in those sectors. That's the target. Now we have to test that. We have to determine whether we're actually getting a sample that is representative of the market as we know that market exists. So we use information from the Census Bureau, from DBE lists, from all places that we can get data from to test and see if in fact we are getting a sample that is representative of the minority and woman-owned business communities. So it's not taken for granted that we have it. We expect to have it because it's a large sample. It is a randomly drawn sample, but we go back and test. And there's also issues about the representation in the DBE database of whether or not a firm is woman-owned or minority-owned. This has been brought up historically. And in disparity studies, we always go in and make random phone calls to firms that are identified as minority firms or not, to see if in fact they are minority or not. So we have a sort of a second check to make sure that we're getting a representative sample for the minority and woman-owned firms within that major survey.
Okay. Thank you. We appreciate that. And we are getting close to time, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time here on the call. And so, you know, we did get a long list of questions, but I'm going to try to capture the general sentiment of many of the questions. And that is, how can COMTO help? Again, I just want to make sure that we reiterate our position that we want to ensure that, and even if I understand the rules, but you know, sometimes the utilization piece is precluding you from reaching the accurate representation that COMTO would like to see with respect to minority-owned businesses. So I just want to reiterate that position one final time. And then what can COMTO do to help? And I'll direct that to Deputy Administrator Bose and anyone else who wants to answer.
Absolutely. So first, you have been helping, and by just supporting efforts to increase more funding to rail, and also by giving me the opportunity to appear at this forum, to have an ongoing dialogue with you and your members, and to really now, just as an easy example, social media is such a big way we communicate now. So when FRA puts out the call or reminds people about the survey, and we sort of amplify that, if you could do that, if COMTO could do that as well, and we'd like to be in close touch with you on that. And then in addition to that, also just getting the word out to your members, to remind them about the survey, and to really look, you know, in their emails and make sure that they didn't overlook it. And Michael, you can jump in here. Is there an effort to resend that request to firms that haven't responded yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So the process that the University of Chicago uses is a relatively standard survey practice. They send out the initial request. Some of those we find, you know, bad emails or bad addresses. So we go back to D&B and get new ones to replace those. We also, if people don't respond, we go back to them with another email. We go back to them with postcard. We include copies of your letter, sir, so that they see that as well. They know that this is a legitimate effort to collect this information, that the goal and purpose of the effort is such that it's going to benefit the construction, the whole railroad support industry. And so we hope they read that and get the idea that it's in their interest to respond and provide this information. It's a positive thing. The response rate has been lower than we expected it to be at this time, although it's creeping up bit by bit as we continue with follow-up emails and postcards. We're looking at some other ways to increase response rates as well. We will be making phone calls as well to some responders who have started responses and not finished them. So we'll encourage them to go ahead and finish. We'll do everything we can to get those response rates up. We don't know what the impact of the COVID situation has been on firms. Some of these firms may have just too many things to deal with these days, and it's harder for them to respond. The fact that this is a national study, which is a little bit different than historical disparity studies, which tend to be more locally focused, may have some impact on response rates as well. So we continue to do everything, the University of Chicago continues to do everything in this sort of standard process of data collection, survey, follow-up that will indeed encourage the responses to increase. And we'll continue to look at other ways that we can increase response rates.
Thank you so much.
And I think that that's an important point, just quickly, just to emphasize, is that just the historic nature of this, even though we have a ways to go, there just hasn't been a national disparity study of this scope in one of the modes in a very long time. So in respect to that, I think communication with COMTO ongoing on a regular basis would be really valuable. I know from my perspective, to respond to your members, to questions that you have directly, and the questions that we didn't get to, we're happy to respond to you all in writing so that you can get the word out to your members, even though we didn't get to them in this limited time we have today.
Thank you so very much. We do actually have the questions and we will share them with the participants. So we certainly do appreciate the work that has gone into that. One thing I just do want to share before we close out is that COMTO is ready to be a resource for you. We do have a very good working relationship with the staff already. And Deputy Administrator Bose, I want to thank you for making this a priority. You are right, this is historic. It has been on our legislative agenda for many, many years. And just the fact that we are having this conversation right now, the disparity study has been revitalized and is out there, is just a great first step, and it's a huge step in the right direction. So we definitely want to thank you for making that one of your priorities, and thank your team as well for all of the support and information that they have provided. I am going to turn it over to Gwendolyn Gray, who is going to close us out. Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you so very much for giving the FRA administration some great tough questions there, but we have received some amazing response and answers, and we truly appreciate it. And it is a true honor to have an FRA administrator, a deputy administrator, excuse me, Amit Bose, to join us today, providing a wealth of information. Thank you to the panelists and the FRA staff, Calvin Gibson, who has been so instrumental over the past years in supporting COMTO and the Hub Subcommittee. We appreciate you so very much. And thank you, Tara, and the COMTO staff for making this happen. We would like to thank Terrence Hicks, our immediate past chair, for initiating this effort over 5 years ago. And we're going strong, and we're continuing to work with the FRA on this right now. And we see the FRA as our long-term partner. And we are so grateful for this great opportunity and partnership with you. Thank you so much. COMTO looks so forward to working with the FRA as we work towards providing opportunities to the DBEs and creating jobs across the US, our great, wonderful nation. And we thank you so very much. And the Hub Subcommittee is dedicated to supporting our small business members as we continue to move the nation forward. Thank you so very much, and I'll turn it back over to Tara.
Thank you, Gwen. And with that, we will go ahead and wrap up and end our webinar. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We truly appreciate your participation here, and we hope that this has been a great source of information, and hopefully we've answered most of the questions. As I mentioned, this has been recorded. Well, I didn't mention this is being recorded, so it is available for rewatch, and we will be certain to get the answers to all the questions that were submitted previously out to the participants. So thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.